Let's go over another email. This one reads, Dear Mr. Rivenberg, I truly enjoyed your course. I was hoping you could provide me with some information. Thanks to you, I realized the problem with using overlay widgets. I have been learning and practicing doing manual audits. I am also learning HTML and CSS to learn how to remediate any issues that the audit discovers. My question is, if you find issues and it does take time to remediate those issues, what do you suggest to your customers to do while the remediation is taking place? Thanks. This is an excellent question and an awkward scenario that comes up more than you might think, where the client wants to do something, but there's nothing for the client to do. And so if there's an accessibility platform, then there's this handoff where it's, well, like you can use the scan and check the scan results. But that doesn't even make any sense, because while the audit is being conducted, while remediation takes place, the website should remain static. And if there are any changes for the client to make, they need to let the service provider know these are the changes we need to make, because otherwise it's going to tamper with the results of the audit or the actual remediation. So there is this somewhat awkward this somewhat awkward time frame where the service work is being done and the client may want to progress with accessibility. So the first recommendation is the client should be training their digital team on accessibility. This should already be happening anyway, but this is a great time for them to start training, so that maybe it's just the audit that they're getting back, or maybe it is remediation. Either way, the client needs to familiarize themselves with accessibility and develop proficiency and eventually expertise in-house. Because the idea is that the client is at some point not going to be reliant upon the third-party provider. Now, maybe they want an independent audit on an interval basis. Maybe they want some type of maintenance, whatever that's going to entail. But optimally, the client will understand accessibility so that they are out of this process where they are creating code or creating content and then we're remediating after the fact. Because even if the client has the budget for that, which it does get pricey, but even if they have the budget, that's highly inefficient and it's a complete waste of resources and time. So you don't want to be in this process where you're creating and then remediating. You want to be creating and incorporating accessibility into the creation process. So that way there are hopefully no accessibility issues, but at the very least, significantly less accessibility issues. So one, training, and then once training has taken place, then the implementation of accessibility into processes, whether they be development, design, content creation. You should have this implementation into processes. And then also the client can be working on an accessibility statement. And for most organizations, I recommend an accessibility policy, even if it's a minimal accessibility policy. I recommend having one, because that's going to be the document where everything is centralized. We know who is responsible for what. We know what our plan is for accessibility, and we're not just working on accessibility on an ad hoc basis. Rather, it's a part of our processes, and we have this actual formal approach to accessibility. And by the way, an accessibility policy can help you legally in terms of it can be considered if you are trying to dismiss a case based on mootness, because you can show you have this policy in place. Therefore, it is unlikely that any accessibility issues that are claimed would come up again in the future. There are more details to that. The point is that an accessibility policy can be beneficial even for small businesses, but having an accessibility policy is another thing to work on. And then along with the policy, along with the processes, you can have roles delegation. So it's like, okay, you're now going to take on accessibility, or we're bringing in this external contractor for accessibility, whatever the case is. And then also, you as a service provider can give your client advance notice of potential accessibility issues, so that they know, hey, you need to start also anticipating working on this or begin work on this. So one example would be with third-party integrations or a third-party portal. If that's the case, then you can let them know, like, look, there are likely going to be accessibility issues with this. So this is something you may want to contact that third-party provider and start asking them about accessibility and putting in a support ticket. And then when it comes to documents, same thing, right? Like if you know about, let's say they are Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, Microsoft Word documents, etc., then you can let the client know that these are going to be potential. You're going to need to remediate those documents. And then along those lines, if you are aware of, let's just say there are many images that are missing alt text or where the alt text descriptions are insufficient. This is something where the client can start working on a spreadsheet of the different alt text that they want to have assigned for these various images. And by the way, there can be not just dozens, but literally hundreds of images. So this is something that the client can get started on in advance. Not that they're going to be directly updating the alternative text, but that they can have the spreadsheet so they can work from this and immediately start adding the correct alternative text to these various images. So you can, as the service provider, you can give the client an advance notice on what could be potential work for them. And that's if the client is looking, if they're ready to get going on this next step. This is not always going to be the case, but since this question was brought up, it is a really good question. And if the client is ready to continue on and progress, then this is what I would recommend. And there are so many options besides directly working on the website. And this can be the case even if it's just an audit, because an audit's probably going to take at least 2 weeks. Depending on the scope, it can take a month or more. So again, the client can get working on this, and there are many things that they can be doing. I will include a link to the WCAG course in the description. This will provide training on the web content accessibility guidelines. So that will be helpful. And I will also include some other links to more resources. But this is what I recommend. If for that it's not a transition, but it's like for that waiting period between the service being delivered and the client ready to act, there are so many different options here to go through. And sometimes an accessibility statement can be relatively quick. And other times, depending on the organization, they want to really customize it and add more information and have it just so, and have their legal counsel review the accessibility statement. So that can take a while. So there are just so many things that can be done. And I think overall, the takeaway here would be that the client is preparing for life after the deliverables. Like what is our work life going to be? What are we going to be doing? And there are so many things that they can do in anticipation so that they can set up their processes and start to make more accessible content and make sure that their code is accessible. And there will, at the very least, there will be less accessibility issues after the fact. And then this will set the client up for success. So I will include links to those resources in the description.